Hello, and welcome to Skills to Pay the Bills. With today's segment of Resources Unplugged, we'll dig into an inexpensive yet effective way to propel your business forward, and that's with the help of an advisory board. I am your host, Lorette Farris, co-founder of the Internet Back Office Systems and Services, or IBOSS, an ecosystem developed to provide services and resources to companies raising capital. Joining me today are co-founders of the Advisory Board Consortium LLC, or ABC, a group of seasoned industry professionals who pool their experiences and talents to provide real-world guidance for small businesses open to the benefits of external advisors. Helping us to understand the value advisory boards provide growing operations is Jack Wilson, owner and principal of Liquid Capital of Philly, who services the alternative financing needs of growing businesses. Bernard Williams, attorney with the Legis Group, providing legal services for a variety of business concerns. And John Marshall Jr., organizational and business strategist, assisting with organizational needs and strategic alliances. I am honored to have each of you on the show today and looking forward to discussing this invaluable resource for business growth. Welcome, ABC.
Hello, Lorette.
Well, Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, guys. Especially in the cold, I really appreciate you guys making it out here today. Let's start. I'd like to understand give me a picture of what the businesses that utilize these kind of services, your services, advisory boards, paint a picture of what those businesses look like. And I know each of you have different disciplines, so I'd like to sort of hear from each of you what that picture looks like.
Well, let me start. Let me jump in and start. I think that the major picture that you want to look at is how we would contribute to an organization that on a growth mode, and what we can do with system matter experts in assisting them to grow either a little bit more quickly or grow with a structured process.
Interesting.
Yeah, I in line with that, a company that's growing, a firm that's growing, a firm that's willing to actually be guided and directed, maybe one that recognizes it has some experience gaps, perhaps even one that's preparing for a capital infusion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yes, and many of the companies that we work with are small. They're growing, they are in growth mode. Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed and overworked and know they need some help and are willing to talk to some other people for the opportunity to get some advice about moving forward.
Before I ask my next question, in hearing what you guys had to say, is it only operational companies that you see needing advisory board services, or can startups also be a part of that landscape needing advisory board services? Advisors, I understand, being one thing, but an advisory board, does it make sense for startup companies?
Well, let me answer that, because that's probably a pretty unique question, because any organization, either in a startup mode or in a growth mode or in a mode that they have been successful, can use either an advisor, an advisory board, or a board of directors, or a mentor. So it depends on the level where you are, you're coming in. You would not necessarily, a one-person company would not necessarily want to have an advisory board, but they would have some sort of advisor, particularly in the area where they're going to grow in that particular field. If it's financial management, you might want to have a CPA or somebody like that working with it.
Right.
I'd agree.
Very cool. And so with that being the case, what is the actual selection process that the ABC group takes a company through as you might be considering them becoming a client?
Well, I'll start. Well, first of all, the really cool thing we do is we leverage technology. So that's what we do that's different. So we'll be able to provide these services and go through a documented process, a process that really has all the pieces that are required, but we'll do it leveraging technology that really saves time. It adds the expertise that the consortium has, and it brings all that to the table for either the advisor or the business in need of them.
Right. How do you get information to assess the companies that you're considering to look at?
Well, one of the things that you really look at when you do an organizational assessment, and I think when we agree among ourselves that we try to go back and make sure that we're adhering to best practices that's been in the industry, and those best practices normally have organizational assessments, and those assessments will give you a benchmark or give you a direction to go. Asking the company, do you have these things within your infrastructure? Are you looking at these things? So it gives us a pretty good jump off point of where we need to go back and look at either from a legal standpoint, from a financial standpoint, or from an organizational dynamic standpoint. And we can look at it from that way. So there are best practices, there are assessment tools that Jack mentioned that are automated, where you can go back and do an automated assessment of that company.
Right. Okay.
And having the opportunity to get that information is so important because it helps us to develop that roadmap.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most important steps in determining a way forward, is to know where a company is when they first come to us. And the beautiful part about the technology is that a company can be anywhere geographically.
Right.
And we can get that information and start to put it to work.
Right. What I like when I'm hearing about the technology side and having a process is many companies have started or tried to start advisory boards, but they don't stick to it. And from what I understand, a lot of that, it happens with a lot of them because they don't have any kind of process set up to keep meetings going, or even when they receive advice, what they do with that advice. How are you guys helping companies to walk that path? Are you holding their feet to the fire? Are you
Yeah, well, first of all, you can't force a company to do this. One of the things we talked about is, the willingness for the company to recognize they have some experience gaps, their desire to be in this and to be committed. And if they are, then what we do is we supply them with a repeatable process. We educate them on the process itself. We do the same with the advisors on the other side so that everybody understands the expectations. And then it's the process itself that guides them through, and we'll provide the necessary counsel to kind of keep them on track. And then it's just the basic things of a process, such as timelines and so forth, that helps them.
Yeah.
But I think a very significant thing, and Jack mentioned real quick, it is the commitment. The word commitment, 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 because it's very difficult for an organization that's starting up and the infrastructure is trying to build, and you have a crisis situation. And so you said, okay, I have all these things that I'm doing, and I've got a crisis situation, so I put this advisory aspect on the back burner. You never get back to it. So we have to be able to infuse in that CEO's mind that commitment is where you're going to really bear fruit of your labor.
I probably should have asked this question before we began, but before we go into the break, I'd like to ask, and so what is the difference, advisory board versus board of directors? Because in some of what you said, the board of directors, they can't push to the side. So what's the difference there?
Well, let's put it this way. One is free and one you pay. Normally, an advisory board is a very objective. In a lot of cases, it's volunteer. And it normally consists of people who are focused on a certain expertise that they have and they bring to the table. On the board of directors, they're basically telling that organization, here are some of the things that you need to run by. They have a fiduciary responsibility, by being paid, and they have a certain amount of commitment to the CEO, where the advisory board, it really says, I'm the system matter expert, here's my suggestions, now you either take them, you're not taking them, either way. So I think there's a big difference. So you have to make a very cogent decision whether you're going to do a board of directors or an advisory board.
And along those lines, the key difference is who has the ultimate decision-making authority. With the board of directors, they have that fiduciary duty. They have that managerial responsibility to the company. They are responsible for the company. With the board of advisors, those advisors want the best for the company, but it's the owner that makes the final decision. It's the owner's business goals, dreams, objectives, et cetera, and they're the ones that make the ultimate decision with the advice and consultation of the advisory board.
I've heard it said that a lot of companies will have an advisory board so that they can forego suggestions if they don't like them, versus with a board of directors.
You always look at examples. I was providing direction to a company, and they wanted to start out with a board of directors, and I went out and found all of these qualified people as a board of director, and the CEO says, I don't think I want a board of directors now because I don't want anybody to tell me how to run my company. So of course then we backed down and went back and picked up an advisory board, and it's been beneficial, but as Bernard said, that board of directors has a big stick to wheel. And most CEOs don't want anyone to tell them how to burp that baby.
And while we don't have time to get into it, but I would imagine it also depends on the legal structure of the company, whether they can or cannot forego that board of directors.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay,
yes.
So maybe we'll pick that up on the other side of the break. We are going to take a short station break, then return with Jack Wilson, Bernard Williams, and John Marshall to continue unplugging how advisory boards help businesses manage their growth and relationships. Stay tuned, as you won't want to miss one word.
Join our mission to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. Every week we feature a medley of gifts from artists, performers, ministers, and more. Experience the Lord's everlasting light in the cool of the day.
Welcome back. You are watching Skills to Pay the Bills and today's segment of Resources Unplugged. Our guests today are Jack Wilson, Bernard Williams, and John Marshall, co-founders of the Advisory Board Consortium. Before we went to break, Bernard, I brought up a point that when we talked about advisory boards versus board of directors, but at the end of the day, your legal structure is what also dictates what you should or should not, can or cannot do in that respect. Can you address that?
Sure. There are certain entity types that require board of directors. Generally, there are 4 different types of entities. There are sole proprietors, there are corporations, partnerships, and LLCs. If a company is structured as a corporation, they have to have a board of directors, and there's really no getting around that. Now, a board of advisors, on the other hand, is not a requirement of any entity type. It's a good idea, and any entity type can have one, but that's really up to the discretion of the owner.
Okay, so LLCs, which are becoming just the prevalent form of corporation that companies are doing, are not necessarily tied to having to have a board of directors.
LLCs do not necessarily require boards of directors. They can have boards of directors. One of the great things about LLCs, which stand for limited liability companies, and are not actually corporations, but limited liability companies can structure their management just about however they want to. They can use managing directors, they can use boards of directors, they can use they can be managed by members. They've got a lot of leeway.
Right.
Corporations are the only entity type where it's required that they have boards of directors.
Okay. So they wouldn't be able to forego the advice It's not advice from a board of directors. It's a directive.
It's a direction.
It's a direction, yeah. And that's where a lot of people really get uncomfortable because, in fact, it is a direction. You bring in a board of directors to give you that direction, to give you that advice, and it's not necessarily means that you can say, I don't want to take your advice, because those directors are tied to the success and failure of that corporation.
Yeah. The term that hit me the first time I was a president and CEO of the company was when they told me the president serves at the pleasure of the board.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. So going back to advisors, what are the expectations of the clients that you take on?
Well, there's two sets of clients we take on: the business owners who are looking for advisory boards, and the advisors, individuals, business owners who want to be advisors. So the expectation from the business owners is what they expect is for us to provide them with a platform that's going to be cost-effective, time-saving, to be able to get them vetted out advisors that fit exactly what they need to give them the fill in the gaps of the experience they're missing to help guide them. From an advisor standpoint, what they're looking for is for us to give them the template of understanding how to be an advisor, because really they're looking to ultimately be a board of director member one day, but also to get them the exposure to the companies looking for that so they can be placed on a board and be effective on it.
So before I go to the next question, I'm glad I asked that, because now the picture I understand is the ABC Group helps clients to fill the gap. Not only are you guys advisors, but you also help companies fill the gaps for advisors as well as board of directors?
If the company in the growth factor, let's say you get that spurt and you start doing it and you want to switch from an advisory board to directors, if you're comfortable with the advisors that you have, members of your advisory boards that you have, and you want to have that contingency, you would ultimately select those to be members of your advisory board. Gotcha. Now, of course, that advisor, because of the fiduciary responsibility that goes along with it, is going to make a decision, do I want to be involved in that? So it's not an automatic process. Okay.
It's not one-sided.
And what we like about the program too is it really addresses the needs of both entities. So we have a solution for both the businesses who need advisory boards as well as those who really want to be one day boards of director members, and we're training them how to do that. So there's a big education process on both sides too.
So I'm glad you said that, because that leads into then what are the expectations that you guys have, that the ABC Group has of the clients? So they may expect things from you, but what do you then expect from them?
Well, as Jack said, we do have two different clients. We have the companies that are in need of advisors, and we have the advisors. With respect to the companies, we need for them really to be committed to this. We need for them to follow through, to attend the meetings, to run the meetings, we give them everything they need. We supply the advisors they can choose from among. We supply the templates, the instructions, the schedules. We give them all the tools they need to succeed, but we need for them to stay committed to it and then to be open to the suggestions of the advisors. With respect to the advisors themselves, we expect them to adhere to the professional standards of their professions, to bring their best efforts, to understand this is not about sales, it's not about trying to get anything from the companies, but it's about trying to help the companies.
Right. So how do you hold them accountable to doing this? That's the expectations. How do you hold them accountable?
The company?
Either side, the company and or the advisors.
It's going to be mostly performance-based. How are you doing performance? We have responsibilities of ensuring if we recommend an advisor, to follow up on that advisor, go back and check with that company that they're working. Is this what you asked for? Is that advisor that we recommended to you is fulfilling both our expectations as an advisor, yours as a system matter expert? So there's checks and balances on both sides that we as a consortium have that responsibility to ensure that it's maintained.
And so what do you use to guide that process? And like it, I'm assuming it's sort of an assignment, and how long does that assignment last? Like, how does that work?
Well, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So you probably heard us use the term best practices, industry best practices. So that's really how we created this program. You know, we've gathered the data that says what makes an advisory board work and what are the responsibilities on both parties, and we basically put that into this process. So what guides them through it, and really what we use is the process itself, and that's really what kind of keeps them on track and helps them to understand what they are expecting, but what's expected of them as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there particular, I'm going to make an assumption that when you start a process with a client, we've already talked about expectations, but are they measurable? Does that help to lead and guide how you walk through the process with a client? Or are there milestones and steps and things of that nature that drives the process?
Yes, and yes. And the answer to it is yes. It's basically if you go through a PMP or project management plan, or if you go through any structured plan, those milestones and those measurements are there. And that's how you assess the accomplishment of that advisory effort. And so you want to make sure that you have a mutually agreeable plan that's between the advisor and the company that's being advised, so you have those check marks. So there's no disconnect saying, well, you didn't tell me this when I get down the stream, and the advisor comes in that you want to build a tent and he wants to build a house. Right. So it's a big difference. So you have to make sure that you have that agreement in place that everybody has signed off on. And then we will, as a consortium oversight, look at that. And because we come together as a board, we assess the agreement, we assess the performance of the advisor, and then we go back and make sure that everything is in place from standard best practices.
And that's an ongoing process. It's important that we started from the beginning. But we want to make sure that as the process plays itself out, that everyone continues to be satisfied or better than satisfied, right. Really excited about what's happening, and we want to make sure that people continue on in accordance with the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I really think that's significant because I've worked with a lot of companies, and especially when they're new, young, and trying to grow, oftentimes that entrepreneur is lonely. Mm-hmm. You know, that entrepreneur is making 50 million, dealing with 50 million issues and having to answer and keep moving all the time. And I've been in that position before. So having someone that you can sort of offload some of those thoughts to, and then knowing that they're coming back with some value add in helping you move through that. I'd like to end this session by here, because each of you are also entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to hear a moment from each of you on the relief that you believe this process, the pain point that you're solving for those entrepreneurs as you're talking them through various issues.
To me, it allows, just as you were saying and thinking, it allows the CEO or myself to evaluate and put in place mechanism and processes for continuous improvement.
Being a business owner, small business owner myself, I see the value in it. In fact, 3 of you are some of the members of my advisory board, which I appreciate. And it does keep me accountable. It solves that problem. It solves a lot of other problems. But it gives us credibility, too, when we're speaking to investors, when we're speaking to large potential clients. They see that it's not only limited to me, but I've got a wide source of information coming my way.
Yeah. And for me, I love the idea of collective wisdom. The idea that you could talk to an attorney and get legal advice, you could talk to a financial person and get financial advice, but sometimes that advice can be very siloed. Mm-hmm. What I love about advisory boards is that you get to hear advice from a variety of different perspectives, all at the same time, all in the same room, to make sure that ultimate advice considers all the possible perspectives and is best suited for your company.
I love it, guys. I love the talent that you bring to the table, and for full transparency, I love being a part of ABC Group also. But I've seen you guys in action and what you are open to pouring into businesses. There are plenty of companies, and each of you have spoken to a few of my clients. And the value that they have come back to me to tell me that they got just from having access to speak to experienced and seasoned professionals that were just willing to pour into them, I think is significant. And so I'm looking forward to having you guys back on next year to talk about more and more of those companies that you hope to move through the process. So thank you for being on, but thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Lorette.
Thank you.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure to have each of the ABC Group co-owners on the show today, and for those ready to harness the benefits of external advisors, please consider speaking with any member of the ABC Consortium. I thank each of you for helping me to explore this topic of advisory boards for our Resources Unplugged audience, and I thank our audience for hearing today's message. I'm praying you use this information to your greatest advantage. Thank you again for watching Skills to Pay the Bills and today's segment of Resources